Tēnā koutou te whānau o Auckland Unitarian. Tēnā koutou nā manihiri, no mai haere mai ki te hui o te rā nei. Haere mai ki te kaupapa o te rā. Ko Clay Nelson toku ingoa. No re ira tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Well, I wish I could welcome visitors, but I welcome you old guard who are here faithfully each week. I'm not sure you even know how many years we've been worshiping here.
122.
She was always the first in class to put up her hand. And and to those who are joining us online, welcome. And if you're here in person, you're invited for a cuppa. Immediately following our service, it is our sacrament of hospitality. I thought I was done explaining the changes being proposed by the UUA. It turns out I was naive. A minister's work is never done. And I suggest neither is yours. I keep getting emails from members of the congregation and members of Angela expressing their difficulty with the changes. Some people are simply grieving. Some just don't understand why. One wonders if this is the best we can do. I seriously doubt my capacity to help them reconcile their feelings, but it is at least my job to try. So here goes. My opening words are by Elandria Williams. We are worthy, not because of what we produce, but because of who we are. We are divine bodies of light and darkness. You are not worthy because of what you offer, not because of what is in your mind, not for the support you give others, not for what you give at all. We are worthy and are whole just because. In this great turning, in this great pandemic, in this radical readjustment and alignment, we're not disposable. We are needed. We are the very people that have withstood everything that has been thrown at us as a people. And as Maya Angelou would say, still I rise. We arise from pain. We rise from grief, from the grief. We arise from the limits people place on us, the limits we place on ourselves. We rise to be the children and the ancestors. We rise to be our true selves in relationship to our families and communities. Recognizing our liberating and whole selves, honoring them and others as we strive for abundant communities, abundant lives, abundant relationships, and abundant values and cultural manifestations. We are worthiness personified. I, you, and we are worthy and deserve a life where we are not always fighting for our existence. Imagine what we would create if we were not always in the struggle. Imagine what we could envision if we could just be let to just go there. So tired of always having to resist, to fight, demanding, pushing. To everyone that has the courage, the power, the ability to co-create what we want and need, while rooting in what we can't lose and who we are. You are the visionary. You are the hope. You are our ancestors' dreams. No, you might not ever end up on some list somewhere, but you are on a list of someone's heart and mind. And if it's in how you move in the world, so people can see by example. You are the embodiment of what we need. Thanks to all that you are, the embodiment. The embodiment not of productivity, but the embodiment of radical love, care, and sanctuary is time. Embodiment time. Embodiment living one's values out loud. Let me every day live my values out loud. Let us every day live our values out loud, embodying our values, not the productivity quotient, beyond productivity, past productivity, true embodiment, life. Chris, would you do us the honor of lighting the chalice as I read the words?
I've never done this before.
Well, you know, first time for everything.
With this?
Yeah. In this free church, we come together without creed, focusing instead on the core values of justice, equity, and compassion, of mutual acceptance of our diverse ways of being, as we seek to connect ourselves more fully with the unfolding truth of life and of our world. We come together in shared conviction that all people deserve a voice in matters that concern them, and that it is up to each of us to protect the rights of all, particularly those who, for whatever reason, have long been held in silence. We come together in the stubborn belief that community is possible and that peace is more than a dream. We commit together to affirm in our actions, as well as our words, the inherent worth and dignity of every human being. We come together in awareness of our interdependence with all humanity and with the wider web of existence, for that too is part of what we meant by we. In this free church, we come together without creed, believing the way we live in the world bears testament to the value of our beliefs. We light this chalice as a beacon of hope for those who have gathered here this day, for all who have ever walked through our doors, for those who may yet find the spiritual home, and for those whose path will never come our way. For all this, and for all those things we dare to hope and dream, we kindle our chalice flame this day. And now, if you will join me in reciting the covenant of our congregation. Love is the doctrine of the church, the quest for truth is art, and service is a spirit. To love and ease, to seek knowledge, serve humankind fellowship, to the end that also thus do we covenant with each other and with our God. Well, I've entitled my musing, "A Minister's Work is Never Done, and Neither is Yours." I keep getting inquiries about and objections to replacing principles with values. I thought I dealt with this issue. I mean, it was a lot of sermons. But apparently not satisfactorily, that's a hard word for my tongue, satisfactorily for some. So let me try again. These changes did not come out of the blue. There are a couple of stories behind them. They tell stories about UU principles and values. In 2017, Mark Morrison Reed gave a lecture at First Church Boston entitled "A Black Hole in the White UU Psyche." A black hole in the white UU psyche. I have drawn heavily from his work to tell the story. In 1969, the UUA held its General Assembly at the Statler Hilton in Boston, which is now the Park Plaza Hotel. During the 40s, Egbert Ethelred Brown had been the only man of African descent you would have seen at their annual meeting. But 1969 was completely different. Most delegates had never seen so many black UUs, unless they'd been in Cleveland for the General Assembly the year before. The black presence left many white UUs perplexed. Some even asked, where did they all come from? African Americans served as heads of the governing board of predominantly white UU congregations during the 40s, 50s, and early 60s. In 1956, a survey reported that 80 Unitarian congregations had African American members, and in 49 of those congregations, African Americans were active as officers. That means over 60 years ago, nearly 10% of Unitarian congregations had African American members holding leadership positions. This was not common knowledge, be it 1969 or now. What is the consequence of not knowing. We see the lack of black leaders confirming the belief that Unitarian Universalism does not appeal to African Americans. Why don't we know this history? Why would we? When in the context of Unitarian Universalism and across the entire American milieu, black lives don't matter. African Americans were invisible in our scholarship. Their absence reflected the belief and contributed to the view that there was no story to tell. Yet African Americans had been founding members of Universalist, Unitarian, and UU congregations as early as 1785, when Gloucester Dalton was a signatory to the founding of John Murray's first Universalist congregation. There were other UU congregations that black folks founded, or at least tried to found. In 1860, a Baptist minister, William Jackson, testified at the autumnal convention of the American Unitarian Association to his conversion to Unitarianism. They took a collection and sent him on his way. Historian Douglas Stange writes, no discussion, no welcome, no expression of praise and satisfaction was uttered that the Unitarian gospel had reached the colors. African Americans were nearly invisible in both worship and religious education as well. Consequently, we have embraced a false narrative about who we are. The fact is this: John Van Schaik, who controlled Universalism's journal, The Christian Leader, for 22 years, was an out-and-out racist. When he became editor of the Leader, articles about Universalist mission to the colored people disappeared from the front page, and he said white Unitarian ministers were betraying their race and should go elsewhere if they wished to be a menace. Are you confused? This faith you love has said repeatedly, sometimes in words, and more often in deed, black lives don't matter. In America, at least, liberal religion was wedded to Anglo-Saxon culture. There was no doubt in William Ellery Channing's mind, or my personal hero, Theodore Parker's mind, of their own superiority. They believed, as did Sam Elliott and Lewis Cornish after them, that the New England, which is to say Yankee Unitarian frame of mind, was something to be promulgated across America. From this racialist point of view, blacks rank below the Irish and the Slavs. The behavior of both Unitarians and Universalists was imbued with prejudice, and their racism was systemic. This is a harsh judgment, but better than perpetuating the assumption that Unitarians and Universalists were enlightened when they were not. principles did not spare us from racist values. The chickens all came back to home to roost in 1969. 2 years previously, while cities burned and rioted, the Black Unitarian Universalist Caucus, sometimes known as the BAC, was formed. They searched for an identity more authentic than the futile attempt to be carbon copies of white people. They saw white liberalism emphasis on integration as a one-way street that elevated white and debased black. Civil rights had changed the law, but had proven ineffective in remedying black poverty. Liberal religion had failed to address the experience of blackness or to settle an African American in a major pulpit. The group called for a new agenda, and by the time they emerged, the BUC steering committee had been formed. They insisted that the demand be voted up or down at General Assembly without debate, including a resolution that $1 billion, 12% of the budget, be directed toward the black community for 4 years. Although the all-or-nothing tactic worked with the socially committed Euro-Americans at the conference, it was doomed to fail over the long haul because ultimately, UUs are wedded to individualism and reflexively distrust and resist authority, whatever the cause. The conference sent shockwaves through the UUA, leading to a walkout by black UUs and their white allies. Principles versus values nearly created a schism. Ben Scott, who was there and later became BAC's treasurer, recalled, "It was also traumatic. I'm not the only UU who was irreversibly shaped by it. Thousands were born again. They came to a better understanding of the whole world through the BAC. They came to a thrilling sense of awesome potential of human society. In our little corner of the world, lifelong friendships crumbled. Marriages dissolved, careers were ended, and congregations split into factions." Scott's words only hint at the intensity of the feelings. For many, what happened during the ensuing years be nothing less than life-defining. Paradigm shift away from integration and toward black self-determination was taking place, a change for which the UUA was ill-prepared. Some depict this as a failure of vision. The paralysis, however, is understandable. How does one decide whether to support black demands for empowerment and justice or to respect the democratic process with its vagaries and delays? While the BAC won the vote, budget constraints prevented the UUA board from fulfilling the demand. The BAC disaffiliated from the UUA black UUs left their congregations in droves. The UUA stumbled and had to. But the event also set the scene for women, lesbian and gay people, the disabled, Hispanics, and other marginalized groups in the UUA to speak up, claim their space, and make demands. These identity groups also experienced resistance, but the outcry was neither as prolonged nor intense. Who today would challenge an oppressed group's right to gather together to explore its identity, formulate a strategy, and take a stance? Never again since 1969 has the UUA Board of Trustees, nominating committee, or commission on appraisal been without significant African American representation. Never again would we produce a hymnal or religious education material without reference to the African American experience. The events set in motion by the Black Rebellion traumatized, but also transformed some and educated us all. As Ben Scott said, the tragedy would have been if successive generations had had to continue the struggle they did. Now there's a second story that's related. A story about principles and values being in conflict happened near the end of Peter Morales' term as UUA president. When elected in 2009, he was the first Latino and second person of color to hold the office. During Morales' presidency, the UUA embraced immigration reform and immigration rights as key priorities and promoted Black Lives Matter. Morales launched a comprehensive review of UU ministry early in his presidency as part of a push to make Unitarian Universalism a multicultural faith, and pointed with pride to a growing number of ministers and seminarians preparing for UU ministry who are people of color. However, he was frustrated that hiring practices advantaged white candidates over people of color, perpetuating white supremacy. He resigned as president 3 months before his term ended. When he left office, he called on the UUA to take seriously the question of how our policies, practices, leadership, and culture systemically center and advantage white people within UU. We acknowledge that it is time for us to examine more deeply than we ever have the patterns of institutional racism embedded in our leadership practices, including hiring. These stories were the beginning of taking our values as seriously as our principles, which would lead to the proposed changes in our bylaws. So what is the difference between principles and values? And how are they related? The stories tell us 2 things. We have not always lived up to our principles. Principles help guide our behavior, but only if our values align. What you should know about principles, they don't change with time. They don't depend on the values you hold dear. They're independent of religions and personal belief systems. They're not up for debate. While plenty of religions take credit for the existence of principles, it's more accurate to say principles in concert with personal values guided the creation of religion and other beliefs. Put simply, your values are your why, the reason why you do what you do and think what you think. Values are part of your internal guidance system. According to science, values are mental processes involving cognition and emotion, thinking and feeling. That said, to be effective, values must be actionable. They must be actionable. If your actions suggest otherwise, it's not enough to say your values are honesty, courage, and tenacity. What else should you know about values? They're personal and subjective. They can change with time. Their merit depends on their alignment with principles. Your habits and actions speak more about your values than your words do. So what are the critical differences between principles and values? Values govern your behavior, principles govern the consequences. Your values drive your behavior and determine your chosen habits. Deeply held values are more likely to influence you than those you admire but haven't internalized. On the other hand, principles have more to do with the consequences of your action, from condemnation or praise to punishments and rewards. The more your values and resulting behavior diverge from universal principles, the more likely you will be judged and punished for them. I give you what happened in 1969. Values are the maps. Principles are the territory. Values help you navigate the terrain in which you live, work, and learn. Principles are inherent to the terrain, your entire world, and the many laws govern you. Whatever you bring to that world, principles are already there. You have no role in their creation or maintenance. And your values do not agree with, and if your values do not agree with those principles, your maps and navigation systems will fail. Values are subjective and emotional. Principles are objective and factual. Your values depend on your choices, personal preferences, and what you've learned from others. Principles are dependent on subjective experience and preferences based on facts or universal reality. They're objective and irrefutable. Whatever you believe and however you behave, principles just are. Values are personal. Principles are universal. Your values are your own. Once you identify the values you hold most dear, they're intensely personal. They're who you are or want to be or both. Principles are universal and they don't rely on individual choices, beliefs, or moral codes. They're more likely to influence all three. The more personal values in a community align with those universal principles, the more cohesive and supportive that community is likely to be. Values are internal, principles are external. Values are formed and maintained inwardly as part of your internal guidance system. Your set of values exists only within you. Another person may share some of the same values, but their unique set and inherent prioritization will likely differ from yours. Principles are external to you and individuals in general. They exist outside of your mind and heart, and your will does not affect them. Values are chosen or adopted. Principles are not. You choose your values or you adopt them from someone who influences you, and you can, over time, decide to abandon some values in favor of different ones. Principles are chosen. They exist independent of your will and understanding. You can choose values that align with them, but can't select the principles themselves. But you can choose to live by them. That's what values are for. Values can be destructive. Principles cannot. What happened in 1969 and 10 years later with Peter Morales are examples of how destructive they can be. Values aren't based on an inherent sense of right and wrong. Your values govern your actions, even when those actions do more harm than good. Values don't align with universal principles like justice, equality, and altruism. They can be toxic and destructive. Principles, on the other hand, cannot be destructive. It's a diversion or defiance from defiance. Let's try that again. It's a diversion from or defiance of those principles that causes most of it, if not all, the problem we face. The purpose of the changes to our bylaws is to align our values with our principles. The stories I share explain the necessity of doing so if we are to be true to who we are. Principles without values leave us without guidance. Values without principles fail to empower us. Now, please join me in the words for extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light truth. or the fire of commitment. We equally carry in our hearts, so we are together. My closing words are by Michael Schuller. If you are proud of this church, become its advocate. If you're concerned for its future, share its message. If its values resonate deep within you, give it a measure of your devotion. This church cannot survive without your faith, your confidence, your enthusiasm. Its destiny, the larger hope, rests in your hands. The discussion question: when have your values not aligned with your principles, and what were the consequences?